Welcome to Polaris-Live. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmeri. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion in our series focused on the US-China relationship and its global implications as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user-supported channel is brought to you live in collaboration with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. If you have any questions for today's guest, please feel free to submit them using the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. After the live event, you can also listen to these programs on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for being part of the conversation. My guest today is Bonnie Glaser, Managing Director of the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific Program. Ms. Glaser is also a non-resident fellow with the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Australia, senior associate with the Pacific Forum. She's a co-author of US-Taiwan Relations, Will China's Challenge Lead to a Crisis? She was previously senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Bonnie has worked at the intersection of Asia-Pacific geopolitics and U.S. policy for more than 3 decades and is one of the most sought-after experts in this field. So welcome to Polaris-Live again, Bonnie Glaser. So nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me as your guest again, Sarwar, and great to see you.
I know you've been traveling a lot, and I wanted to make the first question easy. So, U.S. Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth, speaking at the Shangri-La conference a few weeks ago, warned that a Chinese military attack on Taiwan, quote, could be imminent, unquote. A couple of years ago, China's President Xi Jinping instructed his country's army to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. Now, intelligence experts, Bonnie, as you know, are divided on this issue. Some believe President Xi Jinping's statement was a call to arms, but not an ultimatum. Others say President Xi Jinping was very clear. China won't wait beyond 2027 to absorb Taiwan. Where are you in this dialogue? What's your opinion?
Well, first, our Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, at the Shangri-La Dialogue actually said the threat that China poses to Taiwan is real and it could be imminent. We hope it won't be, but it certainly could be. And then he stated, our goal is to prevent war, to make the cost too high, and peace is the only option. So I think it's really important to put that in context. So in my view, he was emphasizing the need to bolster deterrence, but not ruling out the possibility that war could happen. And that, I think, is a good stance to have. You know, if you're Admiral Paparo, our commander at the Indo-Pacific Command, you have to be prepared to respond to a Chinese use of force against Taiwan at any time. My view is on the question you ask, and Biden administration officials used to say that a war in the Taiwan Strait is neither imminent nor inevitable. I really agree with that. I don't think that first Xi Jinping has the intent to absorb Taiwan by 2027. He has said several times that reunification of Taiwan with China is essential for achieving national rejuvenation. The target date he set for attaining that goal is 2049, not 2027. He's had the opportunity to move that date up, but he is not. But of course, PRC military capabilities are growing, and Beijing is becoming more pessimistic about the direction of domestic politics in Taiwan. But when I think about the possibility of China using force, particularly a full-scale invasion, because there are other contingencies that are, of course, short of that, the question really is whether Xi Jinping calculates that the risk of taking Taiwan by force is acceptable. And that goes to issues like how many sons of one-child families will die? What are the implications for social stability if they do? What about if the PLA fails in an attempt to take Taiwan? I would posit that could weaken Xi Jinping's power and Chinese Communist Party legitimacy. And of course, a war with the United States could deal a major blow to China's comprehensive national power and set back Xi Jinping's top priority of putting China on an inexorable path to national rejuvenation. So I think Xi Jinping has to think about all of these factors. I think China continues to prefer to achieve unification without use of force. I think Xi Jinping is not completely given up on a strategy of relying on coercion and also some positive incentives, even though they're not working very well, but it's still a central part of China's strategy. And the goal, which we really need to keep in mind, is to use this vast array of tools that China has amassed to instill psychological despair among Taiwan citizens about the island's future, sow doubts about U.S. willingness to defend Taiwan, and isolate Taiwan diplomatically, so that ultimately Taiwan will essentially surrender. So my bottom line is Xi Jinping has numerous challenges on his plate that currently have higher priority than unification. It's not really a propitious time for Xi Jinping to conclude that peaceful reunification is unattainable, which would then really force his hand. And if Xi Jinping believes he has to show resolve in the case of a war of necessity, if, for example, the United States were to establish diplomatic ties with Taiwan or revive the mutual defense treaty that the United States had with Taiwan from 1954 to 1979, he will do so without hesitation, but he's less likely to enter into a war of choice.
Interesting. That's related to this. Let's pursue it a little longer, if you would, Bonnie. There is a real need to convey what you've just described to the American people, because I think that the layman or laywoman in the country is really charged up with the idea that Taiwan is about to be invaded. Is there a way that our officials, our leaders can try to tame this down, that we're not heading into a war necessarily? How do we convey this to the public?
Well, I think that administrations, and this of course is not just the Trump administration, but also those that came before it, have failed to talk enough to the American people about why Taiwan matters to the United States. Most Americans probably cannot find Taiwan on a map. It is really not a joke to say that there are many people who confuse Taiwan with Thailand. And that's understandable. I think at least in past history, when Taiwan was not front and center on the concerns of the United States, but it really isn't acceptable anymore. I have recommended to prior senior administration officials that the United States, a senior official does not have to be the president, could be Secretary of State or National Security Advisor, deliver a speech about Taiwan, what our one China policy actually means, because when officials talk about our one China policy, they will say, oh, we have the Taiwan Relations Act and the 3 joint communiques between the United States and China, and the Reagan administration's 6 assurances, and you could probably fit in a very small room all of the people who know what that means. This is not adequate for informing the people of the United States. So I do hope that this administration and going forward, future administrations talk more about Taiwan and a bit about the history of the cross-strait relationship, but also why Taiwan particularly is important to the United States, because Americans need to know there is a possibility that the United States would go to war to defend Taiwan. They need to know why.
I'm going to extend this a little bit to Japan and Australia, right? So how do you think that they read the president's commitment to Taiwan? I know that Japan last week told its companies in Taiwan that in the event of war, they were on their own. Japan wasn't coming over to rescue them. I mean, that doesn't seem very encouraging. So is there also a need to tighten up the dialogue with both Japan and Australia? How do you think they're thinking about this equation, Bonnie?
Well, first, Sarwar, you didn't mention one of the recent developments on this issue, which is that allegedly the United States has been asking Japan and Australia to commit their countries in a contingency to step up and play a role defending Taiwan.
Right.
And yes, that's important also, first and foremost, because the United States itself has not made a very clear statement that it would defend Taiwan under all circumstances. The term that's usually used to describe U.S. policy on that issue is strategic ambiguity. And in fact, the president himself, when he was running for election this time around, was asked that question, whether he would defend Taiwan. And he said, basically, I retain my leverage by not answering that question. But that is consistent with the long-standing U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity. Some people would say it undermines deterrence. It is different from what President Biden said, which 4 times Biden said that he would defend Taiwan, but his White House rolled that back and said, no, U.S. policy hasn't changed. But I think Japan and Australia are likely somewhat concerned about the inconsistency and contradictory things that President Trump has said about Taiwan. Years ago, we saw in the book that John Bolton wrote, the former national security advisor, that Trump used to say that China was the big resolute desk in his Oval Office, and Taiwan was the tip of the Sharpie pen. It's 10,000 miles away, and that might suggest that he really doesn't care about Taiwan's security. But I want to highlight something else, and that is a statement that, again, talking about Pete Hegseth, said at the Shangri-La Dialogue. He said, I will quote, "Communist China will not invade Taiwan on his watch." And this is what I'm told that Trump is telling others privately. And it was recently reported that at a donor meeting last year, President Trump said that he told Xi Jinping that he would bomb the hell out of Beijing if he attacked Taiwan, and said something similar to Putin if he would if he attacked Ukraine. Now, of course, or if I think that clearly Trump has tried to end the war in Ukraine. He has not been successful, but I think he does not want to be the president that loses Taiwan. So I think that Japan and Australia have been talking with U.S. administrations about strengthening deterrence in the Taiwan Strait for some time. There's been quite a lot of joint exercises and even conversations about potentially imposing sanctions on China if it were to use force against Taiwan. And so I think that this is not a new conversation, but Japan and Australia certainly don't want to be asked to clarify their stances about what they would do in the event of a war in the Taiwan Strait. I don't think that they will commit, and I don't think it helps our relations with our allies to be asking them to do something that we ourselves have been unwilling to do.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with you on that. I want to ask one more question on Taiwan, if you don't mind. And I think this is an area that's not often explored. How are the people in Taiwan, the citizens of Taiwan, coping with what's going on here? I mean, they're obviously the military preparations. There was an article over the weekend on using the transit system to move troops. It sounds like they're getting ready for anything that may happen. Is their morale, you travel there, is their morale high? What are the people thinking, Bonnie?
That's such a fascinating question, Sarwar. And I think there, like in any country, and certainly in democracies, but not limited to democracies, there's just a broad range of views among the people of Taiwan. For a long time, The government in Taiwan has not highlighted the threat from China. This did really begin under the prior president, Tsai Ing-wen. She would speak publicly about the threat and about the need for Taiwan to step up and understand what the nature of the threat was, and she would don camouflage and go talk to the military and give speeches, go on Navy ships, and try to call people's attention to the issue of the need for preparedness. But that is now much more front and center in the policy of William Lai, Lai Ching-te, the current president in Taiwan. He created what he calls the Whole of Society Defense Resilience Committee in June of last year, and has been conducting exercises that bring civilians and into the defense of Taiwan to understand what societal defense is about. And the exercises that have been reported recently in many media was 10 days of the annual Hanguang exercise. Last year, these exercises were 5 days. And we have seen over the last year many more cycles of exercises that really involve the public. And so they're trying to heighten awareness, to give the public an understanding of where they would go if there was a crisis, where's their shelter, make sure they have a to-go bag with the right things in case they do have to shelter in place. They've made people understand more about what the nature of the cyber threat is, the propaganda threat. So I don't think that China has succeeded very much in lowering morale in Taiwan, with the one exception of sowing doubts about whether the United States will come to Taiwan's defense. And that's an area where public opinion goes up and down. Right after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Beijing's propaganda in Taiwan was, you see, the United States isn't going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. It's not going to really defend Ukraine. And that should be a message to people of Taiwan. And so, yes, there was a spike of uncertainty. There's a narrative in Taiwan about the lack of confidence in the United States. But nonetheless, I think that Taiwan is moving in the right direction in its own defense reforms, in informing the civilians, and in ensuring that they have the wherewithal to defend the island. They have a long way to go, I would say, but the trajectory is in the right direction, and involving the civilians is new for Taiwan. And I think it's the right choice.
Let me take a moment, Bonnie, to remind viewers that Polaris-Live is commercial-free and entirely viewer-supported. We'd appreciate your signing up to our mailing list of Kashmeri.com. There's no cost to it. It really does help us. We always welcome your comments on our video and podcast channels. So back to Bonnie Glaser, from the managing director of the Indo-Pacific at the German Marshall Fund. What I want to ask you is a comment. I want to ask you about a comment that former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel made on Polaris-Live last week. He said, we were talking about strategy, and is there a strategy of any kind? He said that the Trump administration cannot even spell the word strategy. Do you agree?
Well, I think that's probably it's a nice exaggeration, but it is true. I think that there really is no coherent strategy in the Trump administration, and we'll see whether it evolves. I mean, this isn't even true on trade, certainly not on China. The government departments are relatively siloed. There's limited interagency coordination. But many of the jobs are really not yet filled, including Assistant Secretary of State for the Indo-Pacific, both at the Pentagon and for East Asia at the State Department. So there have been names. There's still hearings going on, and eventually, yes, people will be in place. The administration, of course, hasn't released a national security strategy yet. There haven't been any major speeches on China. And this speech by Hegseth is the only one that's been on the Indo-Pacific. In that speech, he did say the U.S. was reorienting toward deterring aggression by China, and accused China of seeking to fundamentally alter the region's status quo. But he also said the U.S. doesn't see conflict with China, and that the U.S. will not instigate nor seek to subjugate or humiliate. And I want to highlight that because I think that these are assurances to China. Assurances played an important role in the Biden administration. So having credible threats, military threats, are essential for effective deterrence, but also you must have, I believe, credible assurances. And I was personally glad to see those statements made by Hegseth. So, the trajectory and goals of Trump administration policy toward China are not yet clear. There are many contradictory signals. Recent media articles are claiming that the United States has dialed back aggressive measures against China. And that is clearly seen in the reversal of its positions on technology controls, at least those that were imposed after April 2nd, the day of the announcement of the Liberation Day, the tariffs. And Trump is now focused on preparing for a summit with Xi Jinping. But there are many officials in this administration who favor tough policies toward China, including Vice President Vance, our National Security Advisor, and State Department Secretary Rubio. And I would also include on that list Defense Secretary Hegseth. So I think there's just a lot of contradictory impulses and ideas in the administration, and we have yet to see a coherent strategy.
But Bonnie, I must inject here something I read just yesterday from the latest Foreign Affairs magazine, which we all read without fail, and they, I think, are trying to make the argument that don't say Trump doesn't have a strategy. He does have a strategy, and the strategy is that we are going to shift our attention away from Europe, the rest of the world, and focus on China, and that this is going to be our strategy. So if you tie everything that's happening, perhaps even the tariffs, Bonnie, maybe, do you agree with that kind of thinking?
Well, there are definitely individuals in the Trump administration who believe that Europe should step up, acquire more capabilities so it could defend itself, and that we should focus on China and strengthening deterrence and ensuring that China doesn't use force. I believe, of course, that it is important to emphasize have the Europeans step up more to defend themselves. But Europe also believes, many countries in Europe, including Germany and the UK and France, believe that they have very clear interests in preserving peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific writ large, that they have important economic interests. Freedom of navigation is important to them, and they actually want to be present in the region, even if folks at the Pentagon are telling them that they should not be sailing their military ships in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. But more importantly, a strategy toward China should not just be a military strategy. And if we are going to help shape China's choices going forward, I think that the United States needs to be working with its allies. This is one of the most important sources of leverage and the strengths of the United States is our alliances, our coalitions. I do think tremendous progress was made under the Biden administration in forging closer ties among the US, Japan, and Korea. The lattice work was the term that they used to describe the strengthening of relationships in the region. And sometimes in small coalitions where the United States was not even necessarily included. Japan's relations with Australia and the Philippines, for example, have really improved. So these are important data points when we talk about strategy toward China. I believe we can't have an effective strategy toward China unless we include our alliances, and Europe is very important in that regard.
So let me, gosh, we could go on forever, but I need to have 2 or 3 things I want to talk to you about. Bonnie, I was reading today in the Wall Street Journal that that the world is plowing through these tariffs and the issue of tariffs, the minimum tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and so on, and doesn't seem to have missed a beat. So, what do you think that both China and America are learning? Perhaps it's too early, but have a shot at it, will you? What are both countries learning after 4 months of these tariffs?
I think that both countries are drawing interesting lessons from these tariffs and how the other country has reacted in the because this is an interactive process of course initiated by the Trump administration, but Beijing has taken off the gloves and made some pretty sharp slugs against the United States. Right. And so when the United States announced on April 2nd that it was going to impose a 34% tariff on imports from China, I think President Trump expected China would just cave in, seek negotiations, because the U.S. had an assessment that China's economy was weak. I think that was, the main driver of their assessments. And instead, of course, China imposed tariffs with equal duties of its own goods on U.S. on U.S. imports. And also said it would require companies to apply for a license before exporting 7 types of rare earth. And the really interesting thing was that Trump wrote then on social media, China played it wrong. They panicked. This is the one thing they can't afford to do. But that really revealed that Trump was surprised by Beijing's response. Yes. He misread Xi Jinping's resolve to stand firm against U.S. trade pressure. And subsequently, when Beijing actually banned the export of these rare earths to the United States, I think Trump himself panicked. It wasn't really China that panicked. So now Beijing has learned it has powerful leverage over the U.S. because of its dominance in critical minerals. Yes. And it has successfully used its leverage to compel the United States to include export controls in negotiations for the first time. And this is just it's unprecedented. The U.S. had always refused to include export controls in negotiations, saying they were necessary for national security, non-negotiable. So China has learned how to use its strengths to manage Donald Trump, and the United States has come to understand that China really can't be bullied.
Can't be bullied. It's now listen, in the few minutes that we have left, I want to ask you a blue sky question, Bonnie. You're one of the most acute observers of the Indo-Pacific. You have been for a long time, and I, consider myself part of the group that thinks very highly of your advice and so on. So if you had a few minutes privately with Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping, what advice would you give each of them to improve this relationship?
Well, first thing that I would say is that I do think that there is a good chance that President Trump and China's leader Xi Jinping will meet later this year, maybe on the margins of the APEC meeting in Korea, and it is possible that Trump may go to China before or after the APEC meeting. And I believe that it is important for that meeting to be prepared. I tend to be more traditional in that regard. I don't think leaders should get in the room and just have a discussion that isn't where the groundwork isn't really laid. They don't have to necessarily sign anything. That might not be a great idea, but I would advise them both to appoint senior trusted officials to have regular strategic consultations on issues of importance to both presidents. I think that the strategic channel between the prior National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, were very important, especially in managing the fallout from the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. I think that both leaders should agree to meet once a year going forward and hold video calls, conversations, phone, etc. When needed, they should keep communication channels open. I think they should encourage their militaries to meet regularly. We have not had much contact between the US and Chinese militaries, and they should discuss crisis communications because there is always a possibility that we could have a major crisis. And we should learn lessons from the way in which we managed or failed to manage crises very well. For example, the 2001 crisis when a Chinese pilot actually flew into a US surveillance aircraft. That was the Hainan incident of 2001, where the Chinese actually lost a pilot. And finally, I think they should identify a few areas that the two countries can cooperate on, because I think there still are important areas where we can work together. And if we are not working on anything, even something like cancer research, improving, expanding people-to-people exchanges, then I think we are really headed toward really dangerous areas of competition. So we have to manage that competition and finding something to cooperate on and demonstrate to each other that we do have some interests we might share in common, I think would be helpful in mitigating some of the tensions that are down the road.
Bonnie, when I asked you this question a few seconds ago, I all of a sudden remembered what the former Prime Minister many years ago, Macmillan of the UK, said when a reporter asked him at the end of his term, all these plans you had, what happened? And Mr. Macmillan said, events, dear boy, events. So, Bonnie, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for that thought-provoking perspective. I do hope you'll come back and see us again.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarwar.
Thank you to our viewers from around the world. Please join us again on Polaris-Live.com as we continue to explore the most consequential relationship in the world, the United States and China, and its impact on the world. Until that, goodbye.